All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much for attending this Zero Events fireside chat to discuss the McKinsey report entitled Value Creation in the Metaverse. That is the subject of our exciting discussion today. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Let me find, yes, get it up on the screen. Everyone can see, right? Does everyone see the screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it appears on our personal screens too, by the way, if you want to
perfect, yeah.
look at that, David.
Yeah, it's a little easier to read.
Yeah, under a shared screen.
Cool.
So first things first, I was taken with the avatar just because it's obviously the first visual that you see, and I can't tell if this is kind of like a Duplo type of toy design. I haven't seen any avatar with this design yet, so I wonder where they got it. But first thought, so just getting into it, my first question to everyone would be, always start with the least important observation first, is what's your main takeaway? And just broadly speaking, how insightful did you find the report, maybe for you personally as an audience, and then maybe we can discuss like who perhaps were the intended audiences for this report.
This is a good time to say that I haven't read it.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
I've skimmed it. I've skimmed it, but I haven't read it in great detail.
Okay. Well, we can read it together. It's only 70 pages, but Lance, sorry.
No.
I know you read it 2 weeks ago.
But yeah, I read it a few weeks ago, so I'll need a refresher on some of the points because there isn't much that stood out as surprising or enlightening, but it's a comprehensive source of how people are using the metaverse, and but yeah. So no, I don't have any initial thoughts.
I mean, I think the main takeaway, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think one sort of main takeaway is it's kind of significant that McKinsey write a report like this. That was the main thing. I was like, okay, I've kind of been waiting for it because of Richard in our group, but for me it was pretty interesting to see. They put a team on this, which is to be expected for a consultancy company, and they've come out with it. And again, from my scanning of it, no real surprises. Very focused on revenue generation and the kind of, I guess, the financial effects of it, but they've done it,
It is, because McKinsey has that reputation, right? When PwC or KPMG does it, you're like, okay, that's cool, I'll take a look. But definitely, I feel like the McKinsey name carries more weight, but it also, for me at least, carries a little bit more burden of expectation. When I'm looking at the report, because of their prestige, I'm expecting perhaps a little more, I don't know, more of a compelling argument, a little bit more detail, something. I don't know exactly what, because of course they're still a consultant. But for me, the main takeaway, which was the headline that I saw most covered, was this number here, the $5 trillion by 2030 that would be created or opened up or somehow associated with this emerging metaverse. That's the big thing. Alina, did you have, what stood out to you broadly? Was it this number or more?
This number and other numbers as well, just because I think that this number specifically, if we put a kind of metaverse hype train into perspective, or maybe in 3D, how we're imagining, that would be the title for that. So I would put on the front of this hype train, I would put this number, because I think that definitely it was targeted largely to the corporations and large entities that are considering the next step. And we're definitely inside another hype bubble, let's say, that is developing. So what stood out for me, I remember the numbers that they mentioned regarding that I can even quote, corporations, VCs, and PE have already invested more than $120 billion dollars in the metaverse in the first 5 months of 2022. So obviously for us working in the metaverse we do understand that the hype train is happening, but at the same time, it's not drastically, it didn't drastically change from, let's say, last year or even the year before. before Meta made an announcement about the company name change and before this hype reached really kind of consumer audience. I'm really questioning what they identify as a metaverse, if they're just combining gaming, game industry and everything that is digital, now calling that metaverse, then this insane number of investment in 5 months of 22 makes sense. But then did we just reshuffle basically the existing markets and added them to the new one? So that's the biggest question for me.
Yeah, I would echo that. One thing about the investment, sorry, Lance, if I can just hit on that number, because that's the other, I would say the second big number is the massive investment so far this year. But they even kind of acknowledge that I think more than half of that number is Microsoft's potential but very threatened acquisition of Activision, which I had to go back and look at. Was like, did it happen this year? Because I thought it was last year, and I think it was like January, like first week of January, it was announced. So it's a little, I feel like they may be cherry picking just a little bit on that number to show like the huge increase in investment compared to last year, and particularly here because in that first number, that 13 billion, they're using that number kind of like as almost a comparison. But that 13 billion is capital and private equity. Well, whether the other number also includes like tech company acquisitions and investments. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, but they're kind of putting it out there a little bit in a way, I think, to really sell that increased number, that increased investment. But for me, generally speaking, the report features more or focuses more on the amount of investment in terms of numbers. I think in terms of revenue creation, it's actually quite familiar. It's a lot of potential. It's a lot of this company did this initiative, but without a whole lot of, because there's not a lot of data really to show what the effect was. But they really, I think, emphasize the investment as here's the evidence that this is going to be big and this is successful. It's because of the investment going in, not the revenue being created.
Right. I was about to say that, as we've discussed in our group about the metaverse and how we use it as a term, like was initially hesitant, but I came out in favor of it just because it was useful shorthand for some like social things we do in VR. So like you can just say metaverse and you don't need to explain a whole lot just to everyday people. But when a group like McKinsey comes in and tries to quantify what's happening inside of the metaverse, which is so ill-defined, and give us useful feedback, then like what they're actually telling us is lessened in value because the edges around the metaverse are so vague. So So
but at the same time, I see quite a First of all, I think that the hype is working definitely, and I can kind of confirm that from my work that we're doing with Engage, just because every single week we have kind of new clients coming in and saying, oh, now we want our own metaverse. So kind of before that they were hesitant why they need to transition to the space, and now it's like, we want our blue verse, green verse, whatever verse tomorrow. Can we start it right now? And then you kind of try to explain to people that you can definitely create your own space and start your own company, but it wouldn't be exactly the metaverse, but if you want to call it, be that. And basically, we all as industry professionals start to be hesitant with this term, and then half a year later, after a couple of reports, we're seeing HSBC, McKinsey, KPMG just referencing that as a term, and it kind of puts us in the position where we have to deal with that and move forward. Yeah. So I'm just very fascinated always how quickly this change happened and how quickly to adapt to that.
There's the kind of there's pros and cons to this. So on the one side, Accenture, PwC, McKinsey, by writing these reports, of course, they're basically putting this into the common language of everybody. So then they can build consultancy services around it. Say, oh, you want to know more about this amorphous kind of thing that's ill-defined? Well, we're the consultants. and that's what management consultants do, and it's part of their framework. But on the other hand, I think it's a really good thing when we humans have these things that are ill-defined, because you get a lot of discussion. So I'm seeing a lot of in Aviva, I'm seeing all of these really healthy discussions going on around what is this thing, and people have quite extreme views of it. Some people just say, oh, it's shopping online, but it's in 3D. And we were having conversations that were very kind of sci-fi with other people. But I think it's a really healthy thing and a really creative thing that's going on just now around this. Maybe the management consultants will kill it because they'll try to define it and say this is the McKinsey version of it. But I think generally I'm happy that it's kind of put, like you say, a lot of concepts into the minds of the average person that previously were kind of hard to kind of put them into a box, So I think it's a very interesting time that these kind of reports can stimulate.
I think absolutely. I mean, that's going back to when we were first. I threw out this question like who the audience was. Whether we're definitely not the audience. So we have a different perspective. We look at it obviously a little bit more critically, and I agree. Obviously, this is a marketing document, and that kind of shines through very much throughout it. But Lance, you hit on, I think, one of the main issues that I kept when I was taking my notes. I just kept coming back to some of the things they would say later in the report, is that they almost explicitly didn't define, for me at least, the metaverse in a really clear way. And I almost think they went to great lengths to not define it in that way. I mean, to your point, when it's a conversation starter for clients and new business acquisition, but like if we'll just look at some of the things that they kind of start off with, because they add flavor to it later. But they say a sense of immersion is one of the three features, but then later they emphasize that doesn't mean AR, that doesn't mean VR, that can be a phone, that can be email, it can be anything.
It can be like, Dungeons and Dragons,
yeah. Exactly, yeah, it's very incorporating. Real-time interactivity, I do like the fact that they use later this term proto-metaverse, because I kind of push back when I see people really, they do this on stage, like, the metaverse doesn't exist, so stop talking about it like that. Because it's like, I can agree with you if you define it a certain way, but for a lot of people, the way they define it is, it does exist, and it's always been there. Whether or not we could get to it, it's always existed. And so for me, this user agency... I know
the LinkedIn,
the
LinkedIn post you're talking about, I think.
There's a few of them, but it's become it's a position that helps to distinguish one on stage. And again, you can validate it. I mean, you can justify it if you define what it is you're talking. And I know some people, like I think one of our colleagues, Andre, his definition of the metaverse, it has to be, three-dimensionally, spatially embodied. Okay, all right, and that's cool. That's one person's definition. I don't have an issue with it. And in that sense, I would argue we have it, and you can go to it if you want. That it exists, and there's a lot of different flavors of within it. So, but these three criteria here, two of them at least exist: user agency and real-time interactivity. I mean, that exists in social media. I would argue that exists in e-commerce and stuff, because they're not suggesting here that it has to be social. I think later maybe they do think it has to be social. So that could just be maybe here it's not fully representing the what they are intending to say here but yeah, it's hard to see where this isn't extant, in some way.
And the interesting thing that I kind of, as you witness this hype train moving forward, that a lot of companies are already, because the metaverse term is getting so much attention and is so much overused in a sense, there is another kind of trend to transition to Web3, and I'm already at the point where I'm quite reluctant to even react to this term, whatever you want to call it, just because if it inspires more companies to actually go and do things, that's what interests me, because they start seeing all kinds of challenges when they actually get into the spaces. Like, how do we educate people about this platform? Each platform is different, and it requires some kind of training and an adjustment for your team members. And if you try to scale that, it's quite a lot of man hours. And if they go and start to experimenting with that, I think that it's exactly what is needed to identify the path that would be actually kind of workable and to make sense for those companies and those people who are exploring places.
Yeah, here they actually talk about, they do, this is the first time they mention, I think Web3 is on this particular page, but they dedicate some time to establishing what they see of it. It's hard, I think later they suggest that it is a core component of the metaverse. It's not the metaverse fully, but it is a core component. The degree that they include or exclude NFTs and crypto caught my attention, because I think it was they don't emphasize it. It just happens to be very present throughout what they're talking about later, particularly when they get into potential use cases for revenue generation and such.
Yeah.
And then they dedicate an extended little comparison here for Web 2.0. And the one thing I have to say, because at the top they talk about these virtual worlds, the thing that stood out to me the most is that they never, to my knowledge, I read it through, I don't think they ever mentioned a multi-user or a social VR platform by name. Not once. No Engage, no VR chat, none. They emphasized Second Life, Roblox, and then Decentraland and the Sandbox. I think they came up just consistently. But there's a point where they say, like, do your own research, put on a headset, go see an experience. But in that same paragraph, they name, check out NFTs, go to Decentraland and Sandbox. Go to, right after that, the VR thing, the next sentence seems to suggest that they think Gather.town is an example. I don't think that's what they meant. It's just, they don't describe what Gather.town is and how it would be different. Yeah. So it's really strange that they didn't mention Engage or Remio.
Yeah.
Or, any, it's very curious.
I think that's why kind of when yesterday or the day before, it's a fresh HSBC review of, I believe, 12 metaverse platforms, and once again, it's very kind of questionable, because what you identify, a couple of platforms on the list I didn't even know, because they're so connected to the crypto world that they were not on my radar. But then,
like Somnium Space. You're probably thinking of Somnium Space.
Somnium Space, all of them, to be getting attention recently.
I believe that I look it up, but it was even something stranger than that. But anyway, at least it had some kind of distinction between the metaverse, multiverse, they called that, and the platform that I didn't know was Axie Infinity. I saw that.
That's the pay for play gaming.
That's the Pokemon ripped off.
So it's CryptoVoxels,
now that one makes me laugh.
Outspace, Somnium Space, Sandbox, Roblox, Niantic, Minecraft, Horizon Worlds, Fortnite, and Engage VR. So that was the HSBC list. I think that kind of as a continuation of the story.
I was so annoyed Rec Room wasn't on there, because they showed the number of monthly active users there as well.
Yes.
And Rec Room, if they put it on there, it would have been number 4 or number 5 on the list. But instead they put Axie Infinity, which is just
Well, I mean, it's a good question.
I'm sorry I have to jump off, but enjoy the conversation. It was really interesting for me, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Nice to see you, Alina.
It kind of makes me wonder what kind of people inform these reports. So first of all, I'm kind of surprised that in McKinsey's report, more of Richard's thinking doesn't come through. He's not. I know he's contributed to it, or he mentioned it in our group, I think. But I'm kind of surprised that
he got a byline on mentioned this.
Does he have a byline? Okay.
Richard, I think, had been developing, or I think he'd been testing it out in our community a little bit, that 10 layers thing, which I think that's actually a very useful contribution to how we talk about the metaverse. I don't know if I have my controllers anymore. I think they seem to have gone away. that I plugged in. But the 10 layers and the different pillars of it, I think is quite clear. I think it's very good, and I think maybe Richard specifically contributed perhaps to that part.
Yeah, I'm recently looked at Roblox with my kids as well. First time, I think I installed it, and especially because I know Rec Room pretty well as well. I'm kind of looking at these platforms and saying, look, these Rec Room and Roblox have loads of the elements of what's typically defined as metaverse, like in-game currency, the ability to create experiences, all this kind of stuff. But I was playing it with my it's kind of a sidetrack. I was playing it with my now 7-year-old kids, and the thing why they loved it, they were playing some super simple role-playing game, was agency, right? And because when you're a 6-year-old kid, you don't have much agency. You can choose, apart from when you go to the toilet, you can't really choose much about your own life. So they're just in this game, switching light switches, sitting down at tables. And we love this, Dad, just because we can do what we want. We can, go in a fire truck, and they play this for hours, just doing really simple interactions. And I'm kind of surprised that in all of these reports, there's nobody of agency, because there's the agency that are kind of going into the deeper layers of which are light, I can do this kind of stuff. I think that's one level. And then there's spatial interactions, like pass me that tablet, or things which are, for me, look much closer to human agency, or I don't know how to describe it. I think you know where I'm going with that. So I'm kind of surprised that reports don't go into the deeper. Maybe that'll come in the next round of reports, but they don't go into that level of the different levels of current in-game currencies, the different levels of agency, the different levels of even immersion. I think there's probably a whole raft of reports that can just go a level deeper.
I think it's hard if you haven't, it's the first time you go into a world, right? It's hard to describe to someone what that immersive experience is like, and then just the dawning awareness of what you can do in a space. Is when you explain it to somebody, it's so common sense until you're in that environment, because it's particularly things like this that are attempting to replicate so much. I think it's just hard to explain it to people. I think that's one of the reasons why you don't see it in as many reports, because it's just, I think people have practiced. It's just really, it seems so simple until someone has been in that environment or tried to create something in these environments to then understand really how meaningful that can be, and how many decisions go into it. So this is that 10 layers of the metaverse that I wanted to, that I do think this is clear and a fairly meaningful contribution. I could see referencing it, and I think it's clear. Again, nothing revelatory, but very clear and concise, I would think. So we have content and experiences, platforms, infrastructure, and then the enablers. And it's interesting that the enablers, if anything, is that the enablers come under the infrastructure. And I don't remember now if they really explain why that's, why it's in that position in a hierarchy. Because the top 3 layers have a clear hierarchy. That fourth one doesn't seem quite as clear to me. It's a little bit more abstracted.
So a question for both of you. So where do you fall on the argument about enabling creators of digital goods to enact a scarcity of those goods? Because when you create something within one of these virtual platforms, of course, it has the potential to be limitless, meaning anyone could buy it. So if somebody wanted to buy it, it means that digital good has some value for many different people, whether it's like a nice decoration or a clever invention that you can use inside your worlds or something like that. But for many platforms, they don't allow you to make the item scarce or exclusive. It's just like it's either on the marketplace or it's not. But some creators want the right to make limited edition items. So where do you fall in that? Like, should that be a creator's right if they want to make it limited?
Spicy.
Yeah.
Should I start?
Yeah. It's a lose-lose question, what we call it.
I don't know. I think I can understand it from one side, from a creator's point of view, because you can create some kind of artificial value, right?
Yeah.
And both my parents are artists, actually, so I know that most creative people struggle to make a living. So that's all.
Yeah.
That's all truth, right? But on the other hand, I feel like artificial scarcity is like kind of kills creativity. I'm just teaching my son just now about. He said, "Does every ship that gets made in your software get built?" And I'm like, "Well, usually yeah, because you have to put like 1 million man hours in designing, right? It's just a big endeavor."
Yeah.
So he kind of understands why. He's beginning to understand why there are limited things in the world. Extremely important just now because we've got lack of resources, and that's just going to be exacerbated the next few years. So I guess the big part of me feels like in a digital world, in a digital economy where everything is in theory limitless, why introduce this artificial scarcity, which is kind of plaguing us in the real world? The physical world is limited by physical availability of resources.
Yeah.
So it's kind of I've got very mixed feelings about it, but ultimately I feel like it's my personality. It's just like people should be creating more good things than focusing on scarcity, right?
No, I'm with you, because like when I think of like what I would do if I were building a social virtual world with its own economy and the ability to create goods, I would never allow artificial scarcity, because I want people to focus on the experience that you get from that specific item. Because if the joy for you in having something is actually someone else not having that thing, then that's what we would call, I guess, a black hat motivation, like within a gaming context. It's just like, okay, so what does that say about you? You're just selfish and like to accumulate things to make yourself feel good, when you should just have things that you enjoy for the sake of enjoying them. So.
Well, here's maybe it's a scenario that can help that discussion. So remember good old Oculus Home, where you'd go in and you could decorate your virtual apartment? So I would respect somebody who had taken the time to curate, a collection of amazing things they'd found on the internet, more than somebody who had exclusive items, right? So the two types of people. Somebody's like, I've paid money to have this limited edition, whatever it is, But on the other hand, I would much more respect the person who said, well, I've dug through the internet, through old VRML files, and I've found the Newton teapot, the original 3D model file, whatever, things like that are I think that happens in real life as well. You can have people who buy the most expensive and rare art, but you can also go to people's homes who've just got amazing collections of things because they've taken the time and they've they've got a good eye and they've picked things from that could cost nothing, that are even mass produced. It's the collection that they've made that gives it a value, at least for me.
I would say that I think there's a gray area to your point about the artificial scarcity killing creativity. Definitely at an extreme it does, but then you could look at YouTube and there's a point where the ability to earn enough to dedicate your time, it's kind of like a difference between amateurism and professionalism. There was a time where sports were amateur and there was you knew you weren't as good as the professional, but there was some ideal but you're motivated by some type of self-destructive, you're just giving your time for the benefit of others and to push your body to the limits or something. And it's just somewhere there's clearly a point where it's too much of either. There's too many people are struggling and therefore they really can't realize their vision because they cannot earn. But to Lance's point, I don't think artificial scarcity, actually both of you are making the point, that this is not the answer. Like that's a historic arbitrage. Like that's just the reality. You could make more, but it costs a lot to make it, and you have to transport it, and so because of that, we have scarcity that is, it's not huge. It doesn't have to be so scarce. It's just it costs so much, therefore it is scarce. But we're kind of importing this obligation, not of the creators per se, but of the people who are the facilitators. Because the creators oftentimes, they could just be paid directly for making it. So this is going back to like the creator economy. And a point that's made here, and I think frequently, is that somehow artificial scarcity is essential to a creator ecosystem. And I question that inherent assumption that it's because I feel like we have creator ecosystems that already work, and they do not have artificial scarcity. So it's I think I think the people who are bringing it in tend to be intermediaries, who that is their margin. So their vested interests, and without that, they don't profit from this. But it's not necessarily the creators per se. Though obviously we have examples where creators are able to use new mechanisms and new methods, and they're able to bypass these intermediaries, and so there's an argument for that. But it doesn't need to be artificially scarce. Like, well, I don't know if you're a modeler, you're someone who's on the development and production side of things. Lance obviously has also been, and I as well. Like, we're familiar that 3D assets, audio assets, these things have markets. We've been buying them for years. We know how to value them. We know what they are. And we can recognize that 100 other people are using those same assets, and we recognize, and that's the person who made it didn't get $10,000 from one person. They got 100 from 1,000 people, and effectively, that seemed to be okay. So I mean, I think this artificial scarcity is just, it's being imposed. I don't think there's evidence that it's a requirement organically.
No, and it seems to me at least like a short-term strategy anyhow, because because artificial scarcity is meant to trigger FOMO in the people that encounter it, and but FOMO has a very specific shelf life, and then eventually people are like, oh, this whole thing's stupid anyway, and they give up on it. And I know of a platform that is going through this transition now, like where suddenly a lot of people were very enthusiastic about like how they created scarcity, and now they're seeing a downturn in interest because of that. So that's something. But there are other types of scarcity as well, though, not including quantity, but as a collector, you have the scarcity of exhibition space. So, for example, in Rec Room, you have in Rec Room that there is no scarcity of objects. It's just like if you have the tokens to pay for something, you can buy it. But within your home environment, you have a limited amount of space to show those things. Because they each require a specific amount of memory. So you do take care to curate your space so that you can show it off to people and just say, these are the things I appreciate and I like. And Michael's been to my dorm room and that knows at the moment there's just a bunch of paintings there that I got from the Art Fest, which anybody can have. Several of them were free, but I show those off because those are the ones I like the most. So.
Yeah, I mean, but that's because we're human, and that's, I think people are always trying to move away from the user, from the human who's using it. We have a scarcity of attention and time. No matter how much is provided to us virtually, that we still are kind of the limit. We are the limiting factor, and we can, if you really want to, leverage that to create some type of revenue in addition to perhaps the inherent value that something has. That would be that's the scarcity, right? That's live events. Live events are fundamentally that. I can't go to every live event. I can only go to one at a time. So
Yeah, our time and our attention.
I mean, just to kind of get back a little bit to the report and maybe wrap up. they get into they have their chapter about some of the ethical issues. To be honest, bluntly, they report what I think are the prevailing talking points. I don't think they go into particular depth, and I don't think a consulting agency, whether McKinsey or not, really, they don't put forth the credibility to speak authoritatively on that. Though they do talk to at least one person who isn't authority very much, but she's not actually quoted as much as I would have thought she would have been in that section. Rather curiously, they quote Salesforce more in that ethical section, if I remember correctly. But that was the other thing that I was a little surprised, and I don't read as many of these as I used to in my MBA. So David, you may this may not have surprised you. You may read these a lot more. I didn't see as much of McKinsey's voice. I saw an awful lot of interview data from companies who obviously have a purpose for saying these things. The McKinsey voice was a lot less than I expected. And I don't know if that's just normal. Maybe that's just how they make these reports.
That comes in the second report.
The one you pay for, yes. Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of semi-serious. Like there's a, hopefully this is not too much of a sideline, but when I worked for IBM, they showed me this diagram, which is a 4-quadrant diagram called the Conniving Network. And basically it's how consultancy companies, they kind of start with chaos, and they kind of literally pick ideas out of nowhere. Metaverse is something that's been behind the scenes for many years. We kind of knew about it before most people, I guess. And then a consultancy company says, "Look, this could be a thing." They then decide to write a kind of high level report like this about it. They then measure the population's reaction to that, the engagement with it. And then they take a decision, is this something where we put a few more consultants on it and build like a business branch? And then you get the second report, which is insights, right? It goes into the McKinsey's Insights magazine, and you get a little bit more, and you have to pay for the pro level stuff, I reckon.
I mean, it's a bit vanilla. I think it's useful. Yes, that's a tasty way to describe it. I mean, like I said, I don't really to be honest, I think there's just a lot of fluff. I would go beyond vanilla even. I would say there's a lot of things where it's I've been reading that argument in one wording or another for 5 years. It's a little surprising. It shouldn't surprise me, but it just did, because I haven't read a report like this in a little while, and I was thinking, because when they reference, for example, like Nike and was it Gucci and some of the others who've done stuff in Roblox, even the way they discussed it, like that's the information. Nike did it and Gucci did it. Like there's just no more depth to that, and it's not because they can't, but because that data is not, that critical data perhaps isn't so available.
I have a theory.
Okay, I would like to hear it.
It's kind of metaverse related, but everybody kind of we've kind of reverted back to face and all this kind of stuff. But there's been this big general change that generally people are not able to get together in big corporations, especially to discuss these kind of things, right? So something I've seen inside of Eva, and I can say that now that I'm leaving probably, is that the big difficult discussions that you need to have, because they kind of needed face-to-face, meetings in order for people to have fruitful, deep-level discussions. And as you know, it kind of continues into the pub, and that's where all the good stuff happens. And I think large companies, probably McKinsey included, struggle to put together more meaningful pieces of work. There's a theory, because their people are not sitting together, not meeting. I'd be very interested to know from Richard, did those guys meet in Glue or engage to have those discussions? Because as well as we know, one of the reasons we meet in here is to have those, something that's more like a face-to-face discussion, which helps. It helps me, certainly.
I mean, I like that.
That's a little theory.
To your point, I wonder, did they meet in Decentraland? Because they would have been one of the few. Were they in a sandbox? Did you have a McKinsey session in Roblox? That would have been something. If there's Roblox headquarters in one of those, or McKinsey headquarters. I guess they talked about the Dubai, right? Dubai's
city thing,
Virtual Assets Regulatory Agency has their headquarters in the Sandbox, which is, it's like that's both significant in a sentence, but more meaningful than that, just because what does that mean for what does that mean? Practically, like just tell me more. Like I can understand it, but tell me more. The Seoul one, I feel like also there must be more to it. Yeah, just. There's more to it, like because I was thinking when they were saying.
Well, yeah, I know for Seoul City at least, they're trying to offload specific services, like government services, into the metaverse. So yeah, they're actually not just showing off, like using it as a point, a marketing point, or something to show investors who are looking to ship money into Korea, But yeah, there are services as well. Yeah,
and they describe that in the report. So they do. When something that stood out to me is the first thought instinctively, when I then questioned my own instinct, because I think my instinct is actually out of fashion now, was that it would increase access because you wouldn't have the limitation of time and space to be in a particular office getting this municipal service. And then I first thought, well, yeah, but what about if you don't have the hardware or the device? And then I'm thinking, well, perhaps that's very old-fashioned. The number of people who don't have a smartphone capable of doing that might be 100,000, but the number of people who can't easily get to that particular office could be 1 million. It made me question what are the accessibility challenges now? I'm sure it differs from place to place, but in Korea, for example, that might, like my first instinct is perhaps completely wrong. It's just like 30 years ago, people don't have that computer, so they don't have access. But that's probably not true anymore, or it might not be true anymore. Yeah. So I'm jumping around. Any last thoughts, guys, before I fall off the boat? So.
Yeah, I mean, you really did have to leave her up there at the end, like the Chief Metaverse Officer title. So now we do have to talk about Chief Metaverse Officer.
Yes, well, and I have never met Kathy, and I'm certainly not going to say anything critical about her because I've only heard her speak once. So, but she features prominently. She's one of the I think the 7 or 8. We could actually go back and see all the people that they did speak in one kind of lineup. I think it's in the credits. But yeah, Chief Metaverse Officer Lance, your thoughts? You're a CTO, and I often feel like I hope one day he works his way up to a Chief Metaverse Officer. If he really tries hard, he can drop a T and get an M.
Yeah. No, I think I talked about this with David. It was like my goal is like if VetX grows enough, like to move out of the CTO role into a CPO role, which is a Chief Product Officer, because I sometimes get frustrated by the technology. But Chief Metaverse Officer is really sending some bad signals. Like there may be an audience who buys into that, like think that's actually meaningful. But like for me, it's like, okay, you don't know, you're not smart enough to do technology, so you just call yourself Metaverse. And what do? It's like, well, that's a tough one to pin down, but presumably something because Metaverse is such a fancy title. So yeah. And those Forbes people, they just buy their way onto the magazine anyway.
Oh, that's like, libelous. Forbes is a reputable publication that seems to take a lot of tat.
Yeah, and an insider just told me, it's like, how do you get into Forbes? You pull out your checkbook and I don't know, sign it off of Forbes,
Well, you demonstrate your commitment to the community of Forbes readership. Clearly.
Yeah, exactly.
David, did you have a thought about Chief Metaverse Officer roles and what that communicates?
Well, bear in mind that I have had a chief evangelist or something like that role recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a time and a place, especially in a big conservative industries, which are, let's face it, most, right? Anything that's big. There was a need for that to kind of push ideas in a certain direction. And on one side of it, I loved it that there was this politics and lobbying that goes on inside large organizations. And yeah, as we all know, good storytellers, they go far, if you can tell a good story. So I think there's a kind of time and a place for that. And funnily enough, in Aviva just now, like I was saying when we first met, we're having all these deep discussions about this, like what does it mean? The one place to discuss what does a metaverse mean? And I could imagine that a company like Aviva could have a chief metaverse officer for a short time, officer, just to kind of push that idea forward. Unfortunately, the cynic in me says that, that might be just like, do you do that like as a commercial thing? Like, what's our metaverse strategy?
Yeah, no,
is it metaverse for everybody?
I mean, it seems like it should be a specialized marketing manager. Like, if you're just marketing in the metaverse, it's like, okay,
yeah,
you have your chief marketing officer, and like one of the managers is just responsible for the metaverse strategy.
Yeah. That's
chief metaverse officer.
Realistic
where did I see this? Where did I see this very recently? Like, I think it was a LinkedIn post that just said, like, having a chief metaverse officer is the same thing as if in 2004, when smartphones were becoming popular, you say, okay, we're going to have a chief smartphone officer for my company. So,
but to be fair, David, just to come on before you make a new point, to jump on your previous point, some companies might have benefited from having a designated person at a point in time in there. So it's more, the question is who's the audience, internal or external? I think the value creation might more believably be internal. You're just communicating to everyone that this is a serious thing, whatever it is, for our business to really start incorporating into all these different divisions and operations.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
I was just going to say,
it's an audience of one. It's a chief vanity officer. Look at myself in the mirror and say, ooh, CMO, it looks good on me.
I personally think,
sorry,
instead of chief, it shouldn't be like chief metaverse officer. It should be like master of the Avivaverse or something like that. That's more fitting. But no, to get back to your point, we have a head of cloud. We have a head of cloud. Title. Yeah, but we have a head of cloud because, like Michael said, we're just trying to make the point that cloud is really important for the future of the company. And in reality,
that's fine. You can be head of Metaverse. That's no problem. Okay. I wouldn't make fun of that.
But to be fair, there's a lot of companies in the world who have a COO or a CTO, and no one outside of that company knows or cares. But that role still exists because it's designating the significance of a particular type of thought on the company itself and putting that in a head. So again, if the chief metaverse officer was conceived as being for the internal audience of the company, I think it just depends on the company, but I don't think it's crazy. But when, to your point, Lance, what we see mostly is that chief metaverse officer is public facing. It's a form of marketing. It's a form of new business.
Yeah.
Because the role is not very distinct from marketing.
Yeah. Exactly. So head of Metaverse. That's absurd. You might as well just say Queen of the Metaverse.
Yeah.
Like Paris Hilton. Paris Hilton.
I mean, right? There's no there's no scarcity, artificial or otherwise, on titles. I mean, you could argue that titles are artifacts of the metaverse. They're things that we affix to us, that we identify with. We interact with people with.
Job titles are a currency, Yeah. There's a kind of scarcity. So people will their motivation will be massively affected in a big company because they're like, oh, I just got made senior. Thing. I was like, did you get a pay rise? No.
Yeah.
I was like, well, do you get different responsibilities? Yeah, I got more. oh, great. What's in it for you?
Yeah.
Senior.
Yeah.
Immediately leave to go to the next company.
Well, exactly, where they will get paid a little more. I mean, that's
So
maybe it's actually like a parting gift for the right employees.
Yeah. Are you going to read Matthew Ball's book?
I think I am,
actually.
Sorry.
So what do you guys? I mean, I've seen his name once or twice in the past, but now I'm seeing it a lot more. And then coincidentally, I happen to see him here as well. He wasn't really on my radar previously. I think I read his bio, and he was a firefighter. And it was interesting that he did kind of like a full life bio. But I don't know much about. I don't know to attribute any particular credibility to him or not. Not to say that he's not. I just don't know.
Well, he did the most recent Voices of VR episode. If you're curious, I'm going to listen to it too, and decide whether or not want to find his book on a pirated website and read it.
This is the same Matthew Ball of the Times article.
Yeah, exactly. So he's got very high profile right now, somewhat rather sudden for me at least. I'm not in North America, so some of these people are much more higher profile on the other side of the Atlantic.
Rob Lowe.
I mean, his quotes in the report are fine. I had no issue. To be honest, I don't really have an issue with anybody's quotes. They were all, maybe not all super deep, but none of them were over the top bad. More with some of the McKinsey lines. It's like, what? Oh, one thing I would love, so this is just maybe one last little critique of the authors, is they give their forecast of 5 trillion, right? But they actually say, we forecast that the metaverse, where is it? That the metaverse may generate 5 trillion, which is like, are you forecasting it or not? You could just say it may do it. You don't need the word forecast. So they hedge their bets so strongly that just stood out to me.
Yeah. Did they adjust for inflation or what?
That's true. That's true.
I'd be interested to know what was your take on the book, because the reason I ask is that
I didn't read it.
Several of my colleagues now have said, I'm reading this book. It's really good. Because I posted the Times article in our Yammer, and like, look at this. It's actually not bad, at least the first bit, And they're like, 2 people were like, oh, I'm reading this. And I was like, shit. Maybe that is actually a book I should read about.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like almost everything I read or listen to seems to be very surface level. And but it just makes the people who can go a layer deeper stand out much more to me. When they can bring something new. But it's exceedingly rare to hear something like that.
But they're not the ones writing books. They're the ones doing something.
For sure. For sure. But some presenters do. But
the act of writing a book, I think, just takes so long. I think that's kind of like this. That's the challenge to overcome. You might actually have found something, but by the time your book comes out, you've either said it and it's been well received and it's just propagated, and so by the time your book comes out, even your own perhaps unique contributions have probably preceded the book, and you may not get credit for it.
Yeah, but it's not always about being current too. It's just about like spending time with an idea so that there's something I don't know, more widely applicable that comes out of it that perhaps you didn't think of before. But it's like, and I'm sure all of us have the same experience, is like when we're listening to somebody, it's like they're not introducing like a new concept or putting ideas together in a way that isn't completely obvious to us, it's just pretty rare to find that. Like, anyway.
But to your point, David, like I can hear the same thing that I've heard a dozen times, but if you tell it to me from your lived experience, it's new to me. It's familiar. Yeah, I've heard this before, but how did it work for you? Give me these lived-in experiential details, and I'm happy to listen to it again, because I have this expectation that either you're gonna confirm something with a little bit more granularity, or you're gonna tell me something that I didn't think was applicable. So I think when you're writing a report like this, right, the burden is so hard because that's not present. But sitting with a group of people, we can talk about the same things we talk about, but it's as long as we're active in the space, we're bringing something personal to that common conversation. And I think it's just, for me at least, it's a lower bar that for my attention. Like I'm satisfied with that. Like that's all I need is just a little bit of your personal experience to a familiar topic.
But it's funny you bring that up, because I think one of the reasons that, I said I didn't read the, I did skim through it and kind of read the most of it, is because I kind of knew that there wouldn't be too much lived experiences in it, and then weirdly enough, I'm saying that this Times article is good, but actually what I mean is there's nothing blatantly wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm not, because we're maybe not the main audience for these things. That's good for me, is when there's nothing that's blatantly that I disagree with. But I'm not yet getting those, or it's rare, like Lance was saying. I'm not really finding those articles, where you're getting that. Maybe it's repetition, but it's because somebody's gone through a process, or like us testing applications to get to a conclusion, right?
I think a few days ago I was listening to someone, I can't remember where it was. I think it was the Games for Change webinar, and somebody started speaking, and after a few minutes they talked about sensorama, like smelling experiences, and I stood up and yelled at my computer screen, because that's something I've heard one too many times, and I'm like, it's like please, I've heard this 100 times, and like the goddamn sensorama isn't telling me like anything meaningful about the technology, nor anybody else. Like, you don't need to talk about sensorama. That's nothing. Like, you could sum up the history of VR in one slide. Like, summarize it in one slide and move on, please. God,
that is one of those telltale signs. I worked at a university, and I used to go. I mean, for me, it was a clear indication that you don't have anything to say that you didn't get from a book or somebody else's history of VR slide.
A Wikipedia
I haven't
page,
seen
for
it in a
God's
while.
sake.
But it used to be omnipresent. You'd have a 30-minute talk, and 20 minutes would be building up the history. I know a guy, and this guy's smart, but he was put on stage without any first-hand experience, so he thought to spend 2 hours talking about the biology of the ear, which could be a useful discussion, but not for like entry level. I want to make my first VR and AR, and I want to, like, it's just an example of, I have this readily available, this content, because it exists in book and slide form already. I can just pull it. And he wasn't a doctor, so he couldn't do anything more with it. But this brings me to the point about this report, and about a video that I saw McKinsey had recorded in this platform, actually. And I laughed out loud at many points because it was Viveverse. It was basically McKinsey parodying the Viveverse unintentionally. If you know that video from HTC. And at the end of it, I just said, why are these people speaking? Richard could do those exact same things 100 times better, because he would simply, it wouldn't be an act. He has that authentic knowledge because he goes and he puts that time in. And these speakers, clearly, they don't know it. And it came quite rather obvious from it. So I think that's interesting with the McKinsey case. Just again, who were the authors? How much time did they spend? How much were those people the experts, or how much were they compilers of things where they really didn't have the internal ability to curate that interview knowledge, or and not to criticize them at all, because I don't know them, but that's an open question from reading it. If the report was written that way because that's what the audience wants, it's very high level, very superficial, we could also say, and it's just meant to be a conversation starter and not to take much of a position on anything. Or if that's that's evidence of the depth that those particular people can potentially go to. Which would question, why would you go to McKinsey for XR consulting? Well, practically, it's like looking at that report, like it's does it convey their expertise, or does it convey their Me Tooism? I think that's an open question.
They're on the board.
Me tooism. Me
You know,
too. It's like Me Too movement.
No, well, yeah, sorry. Let me think. Me alsoism.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually,
Because all the other
just,
consultings are putting out reports.
I'm gonna jump off, guys.
Yeah.
I've got kids visiting, so I better go and.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
pleasure, David. Thank you very much for joining us for this
great to catch
fireside
up.
chat. We didn't have a fire this time. I'll put a fire in the edit.
Yeah, I
so it'll look like
appreciated
we're
that
chatting.
actually.
It's pretty nice
Not having the fire.
Because as I told you before, the fireside isn't supposed to be literal.
No, it is.
Well, I want to know. I guess Alina knows
it's not.
where this background is. Here. It's kind of nice.
Yeah, it's funny because there's a night version of this, and the night version is different. You can't see because it's all dark, but there's a lighthouse, and there's no lighthouse in the day version. So it suggests that we've moved between day and night. So, yeah, that volcano, clearly, that conical volcano over there is worrying. I wouldn't park my yacht that close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I'll catch you later.
All right, guys.
I'll see you, David.
Yeah, pleasure.
Take care.